The smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, carrying with it the last remnants of a life I thought I knew. I stood frozen in the doorway of our Lincoln Park townhouse, watching my husband Mark hold a photograph over the flames of our fireplace. The image blackened and curled, consumed by fire before I could make out what it showed. The acrid smell of burning photo paper filled my nostrils, mixing with the wood smoke in a way that made my stomach turn. I watched the edges catch first, orange flames licking across what looked like faces, people I couldn't identify before they dissolved into ash. My hands gripped the doorframe so tightly my knuckles ached. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked its steady rhythm, each second stretching into an eternity as I tried to process what I was witnessing. Mark's shoulders were hunched forward, his posture rigid in a way I'd never seen before. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look like a stranger. When I finally found my voice, it came out barely above a whisper. "Mark, what was that?" He didn't turn around. His shoulders remained rigid, his gaze fixed on the flames as if I hadn't spoken at all. I could see his reflection in the window beyond the fireplace, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow and distant. The silence stretched between us like a chasm opening in the floor of our home. "Nothing important," he said finally, his tone flat and emotionless. "Just clearing out old memories." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped further into the room, my slippers silent on the hardwood floor we'd refinished together 2 summers ago. Old memories? Mark, we don't just burn photographs. What was it? Who was in it? He still didn't turn to face me. Instead, he picked up the poker and adjusted the logs, sending sparks shooting up the chimney. The gesture was aggressive, almost violent. "Does it matter? It's gone now." "Of course it matters," I said, my voice gaining strength even as my heart pounded harder. "We have albums upon albums in the basement. You've never thrown away a single photo in 23 years. You kept the blurry ones, the ones with red eye. Even that terrible shot from your cousin's wedding where we're both mid-blink. And now you're burning them?" In 23 years of marriage, Mark had never been one to destroy photographs. We had albums upon albums stacked in the basement, chronicling every vacation, every dinner party, every milestone. He was sentimental to a fault, or so I had believed. He'd even kept movie tickets, restaurant receipts, boarding passes from flights, all carefully organized in scrapbooks he'd spent hours assembling. The man who stood before me now, destroying evidence of the past, seemed like an imposter wearing my husband's face. Now, watching the last wisps of smoke disappear up the chimney, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. The photograph was completely gone, reduced to ash and memory, and with it went something intangible but crucial. Some foundation of trust I hadn't even known was cracking beneath my feet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months, to when I still believed in the fairy tale. 3 months earlier, life was exactly as it should have been. I was Linda Morrison, 48 years old, a successful real estate agent with Coldwell Banker, and married to Mark Morrison, a financial consultant with a corner office downtown. We lived in a beautifully renovated brownstone on a tree-lined street where neighbors actually knew each other's names. Mrs. Chen from next door would bring over homemade dumplings every few weeks. The Johnsons across the street hosted an annual block party where everyone gathered with their lawn chairs and stories. Our home was everything I'd dreamed of when I was a young woman imagining my future. Crown molding, original hardwood floors, a kitchen with marble countertops where I'd hosted countless dinner parties. The morning sun streamed through our bedroom window at exactly the right angle to wake us gently. We had a garden out back where roses climbed the brick wall, where Mark and I would sometimes sit on summer evenings with wine and conversation that flowed as easily as it had when we were dating. Every Saturday morning, Mark would bring me coffee in bed. Not just any coffee, but a perfectly crafted latte with foam art that he'd spent months learning to make. A heart, usually. Sometimes a leaf pattern. He'd present it with a small bow and a kiss on my forehead, and I'd laugh at the theatrics of it, at how lucky I was to have a man who, after more than 2 decades together, still made the effort to romance me. Every Sunday, we'd walk to the farmer's market on Lincoln Avenue, his hand warm in mine as we browsed fresh produce and artisan bread. We had our favorite vendors: the woman who sold honey from her backyard hives, the old man with the heirloom tomatoes who'd tell us stories about his childhood in Italy. We'd buy more than we needed, just to have an excuse to chat, to be part of that community of people who appreciated the simple pleasure of fresh food and friendly faces. Our friends called us relationship goals. Sarah, my best friend since college, would joke that she wanted what Mark and I had. "You two are like something out of a romance novel," she'd say, shaking her head in mock envy. "The way he looks at you, Linda. Like you're the only woman in the room, even after all these years. Do you know how rare that is?" I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. I'd watch other couples at dinner parties, see the way they'd snap at each other or sit in stony silence, and I'd feel a surge of gratitude. Mark and I talked. We laughed. We still held hands in the car. We were the success story, the proof that lasting love wasn't a myth. The first crack appeared on a Wednesday evening in early September. The air had that quality of early autumn, still warm but with a hint of the coming cold. Mark had been working late more frequently, coming home after I'd already eaten dinner and settled in with a glass of wine and whatever novel I was reading at the time. I told myself it was just a busy season, that financial consulting always picked up in the fall. Quarterly reports, end-of-year planning, clients who suddenly became demanding as deadlines approached. But that Wednesday, as I was hanging up his navy blazer, something fell from the pocket. The soft thud of paper hitting our closet floor seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I bent to pick it up, assuming it was a business card or perhaps a dry cleaning receipt. A receipt, crumpled and slightly torn. I smoothed it out on our kitchen counter, the granite cool beneath my fingers. Hotel Monaco, the header read. One night, King Suite. Date: September 12th. Total: $473. My heart began to pound, a steady drumbeat of confusion and rising panic. I read the receipt 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I checked the date again. September 12th. That was a Tuesday. 2 weeks ago. A Tuesday when Mark had texted me that he was working late and I should eat without him. He'd come home around midnight, exhausted, and gone straight to bed after kissing my cheek and mumbling something about spreadsheets and difficult clients. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened our shared calendar. We'd always been meticulous about keeping it updated. Doctor's appointments, work events, dinners with friends, everything color-coded and noted. I scrolled back through September. Nothing. No notation of a conference or business meeting that would require a hotel stay. Just his usual office hours marked in blue. We lived in Chicago. Why would he need a hotel room in his own city? I know what you're thinking. You're screaming at your screen right now, telling me to confront him immediately, to demand answers. But love isn't blind. It's paralyzed by hope, by the desperate need to believe that there's a reasonable explanation, that your partner would never, could never betray you. Your mind becomes a defense attorney, building elaborate scenarios that explain away the evidence. Maybe it was for a client. Maybe someone from out of town needed a place to stay and Mark used his credit card. Maybe there was a last-minute meeting that ran so late it made more sense to stay downtown than make the 40-minute drive home. Maybe. So I folded that receipt and placed it in my wallet, telling myself I'd ask him about it when the time was right. When I'd had time to think. To prepare myself for what was surely an innocent explanation that would make me feel foolish for even questioning him. The time was right that very evening, but I didn't know it yet. Mark came home around 9, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. He looked tired, lines creasing his forehead, his shirt slightly rumpled in a way that suggested a long day. "Sorry I'm late again," he said, dropping his briefcase by the stairs with a heavy thud. "The Henderson account is killing me. I swear these people want to reinvent the wheel with every decision." I watched him move through our home with the ease of someone who belonged there, who had every right to be there. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a bourbon, drank half of it in one long swallow. The gesture was unlike him. Mark was a sipper, a savorer. This was the behavior of someone who needed to dull something. "Mark," I began, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing my work clothes, a professional navy dress that suddenly felt too tight. "I found something in your jacket pocket today." His expression didn't change. That should have been my first warning. No surprise, no curiosity about what I might have found. Just a blank, waiting face. His hand stilled on the glass, bourbon suspended halfway to his mouth. "A hotel receipt," I continued, watching his face carefully for any telltale reaction. "From the Hotel Monaco, 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, September 12th. Were you at a conference I forgot about?" The pause before he answered lasted maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, I saw something flicker across his face. Calculation. He was deciding what to tell me, how to respond. And that calculation, that split second of visible dishonesty, was more damning than anything he could have said. Then Mark laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was light, dismissive, as if I'd just asked the most absurd question in the world. He set down his bourbon and turned to face me fully, his expression shifting into something that resembled amused patience. "Oh, that," he said, shaking his head. "That was for a client meeting. The Henderson team flew in from New York, and I needed a quiet space to go over their portfolio. You know how it is with these high-net-worth clients. They expect privacy, discretion. The hotel has excellent conference rooms, much better than our office." It sounded reasonable, perfectly, completely reasonable. I felt the relief start to wash over me, warm and sweet. "See?" I told myself. "There's an explanation. You were worried about nothing." But something nagged at me. "Why didn't you tell me? I thought you were at the office that night." Mark's expression shifted again, just slightly, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "Because it was just business, Linda. Not everything requires a detailed report. Do I need to check in with you about every client meeting? Every business expense?" The metallic taste of shame filled my mouth. He was right, wasn't he? I was being that wife, the suspicious one, the nag who needed to know every detail of her husband's professional life. What was next? Demanding to see his text messages? Following him to work? "Why didn't you come home afterward?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Mark's jaw tightened. "Because the meeting ran until 2 in the morning and I was exhausted. The room was already paid for, and I had an 8 a.m. client call the next morning. It made sense to just stay there." "Are you seriously questioning me about a work expense? About something that happened 2 weeks ago that you're just bringing up now?" He'd turned it around on me. Suddenly, I was the one who needed to explain myself, to justify why I'd kept the receipt, why I was asking questions. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and I found myself apologizing. "No, of course not," I heard myself say. "I was just curious. It seemed unusual." "Well, now you know." Mark picked up his bourbon and moved past me toward the stairs. "I'm going to take a shower. It's been a hell of a day." I stood in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of our bedroom door closing, the rush of water starting in the shower. Something felt wrong. Something in the way he'd answered, in the irritation that had flashed across his face, in the quick calculation before he'd laughed. But that night, lying in bed beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The space between us felt wider, colder. Mark slept with his back to me, his breathing deep and even, while I stared at the ceiling. Our bedroom suddenly felt like a stranger's room. The shadows cast by the streetlight outside transformed into ominous shapes. When Mark's breathing deepened into sleep, I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows cast by passing headlights, wondering when I had become someone who doubted her own husband. The headlights would sweep across the ceiling in regular intervals, illuminating the crown molding we'd installed together, the light fixture we'd chosen on a Saturday afternoon 3 years ago, laughing about how we'd both gravitated toward the same style without consulting each other. All these accumulated details of a shared life, and yet I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. The second crack appeared exactly 1 week later. I woke at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom, my bladder protesting the large glass of water I'd drunk before bed. The house was silent in that particular way of deep night, when even the usual settling sounds seemed to pause. But as I padded down the hallway, I noticed light seeping under the door of Mark's study. My heart rate picked up immediately. Mark was a solid sleeper. In 23 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd gotten up in the middle of the night. I moved quietly toward the study, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. His side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch when I'd reached out to confirm he was gone. I found him in his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. He was standing with his back to the door, looking out the window at the darkened street below. In the dim light from his desk lamp, I could see tension in every line of his body. I know, he was saying, his voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Desperation? Longing? She's getting suspicious. My blood turned to ice. I stood there in the hallway, barely breathing, straining to hear more. The house seemed to contract around me, the walls pressing in. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden in the shadows, my heart hammering so hard I was afraid he'd hear it. "I'll handle it," Mark continued. There was a pause, someone speaking on the other end. I could hear the faint murmur of a voice but couldn't make out words, or even determine if it was male or female. "Just give me a little more time. I need to be careful. Linda is smarter than she seems." Linda is smarter than she seems. The words echoed in my head. Was that how he saw me? As someone to be managed? Someone to be careful around? Then, and this is the part that still makes my skin crawl, I heard him laugh. A soft, intimate sound I recognized because it used to be reserved for me. The laugh he'd give when we were alone, when something amused him in a way that felt private, shared only between us. But now he was sharing it with someone else, at 2 in the morning, while I stood in our hallway feeling my marriage crumble around me. "I miss you too," he murmured, his voice dropping even lower, taking on a tenderness that made my stomach turn. "This is harder than I thought it would be. Playing house when all I want is to be with you." Playing house. That's what our marriage was to him. A performance. An act he was tired of maintaining. I retreated to our bedroom before he could discover me eavesdropping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. My hands shook as I slipped back under the covers, pulling them up to my chin despite the fact that I was suddenly sweating, my nightgown sticking to my back. The bedroom that had always felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. When Mark slipped back into bed 20 minutes later, I pretended to be asleep. I regulated my breathing, kept my body still, even though every nerve was screaming. His arm draped over my waist in what used to be a comforting gesture, his body curving against mine in the familiar spoon position we'd slept in for years. Now it felt like a trap, his weight on me suffocating rather than comforting. I lay there for the rest of the night, eyes open in the darkness, listening to Mark's peaceful breathing while my mind raced through possibilities. Who was he talking to? How long had this been going on? What did "give me a little more time" mean? Time for what? To leave me? To hide assets? To prepare for a divorce? Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever questioned whether the reality you're experiencing is actually real, or if your mind is playing cruel tricks on you? That's where I found myself in the days following that phone call. I'd replay it in my head over and over, analyzing every word, every inflection. Sometimes I'd convince myself I'd misheard, that "she's getting suspicious" could have been about a client, that "I miss you too" could have been said to a friend or family member. But then I'd remember the tone of his voice, the intimacy, the secrecy. And I'd know, with a certainty that made my chest ache, that my husband was having an affair. Mark continued his routine as if nothing had changed. Morning coffee? Though I noticed now that the foam art wasn't quite as careful, the hearts sometimes lopsided or non-existent. Goodnight kisses, but I realized with a start that they'd become pecks, quick and obligatory, rather than the lingering moments of connection they used to be. Weekend plans that he'd make without the enthusiasm he used to show, going through the motions of being a husband while his heart was clearly somewhere else. But I saw him differently now, studied him like a stranger I was trying to understand. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way he'd check his phone constantly, angling it away from me so I couldn't see the screen. The smile that would sometimes cross his face while he was texting, quickly suppressed when he remembered I was in the room. The new cologne he'd started wearing, something more expensive and sophisticated than his usual scent. Who was he talking to at 2 a.m? What was he handling? And most terrifyingly, what was he hiding from me? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking apart the remains of my trust. Sarah noticed my distraction during our regular Thursday lunch at a cafe in Wicker Park. We always met there, same table by the window if we could get it, same server who knew our orders by heart. I'd barely touched my salad, pushing the lettuce around my plate while Sarah talked about her latest project at work, something involving cybersecurity and corporate espionage that would normally fascinate me. "You've barely touched your salad," she observed, setting down her fork and fixing me with the concerned look I'd seen 1,000 times over our 30-year friendship. Concern etching lines around her eyes. "What's going on? And don't say it's nothing, because I know you, Linda Morrison. You're the woman who once ate an entire burger while crying over a sad movie. Not eating means something is seriously wrong." I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to unload everything. But the words stuck in my throat, held back by a combination of shame and disbelief. If I said the words out loud, if I admitted my suspicions, they would become real. They would exist in the world, not just in my head. And once they were real, I'd have to deal with them. I'd have to take action. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. "Just work stress," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like glass cutting my face. "You know how it is in real estate. September is supposed to be busy, but everyone's holding off until after the election. The market is weird right now." Sarah wasn't convinced. I could see it in the way she tilted her head, in the slight narrowing of her eyes. She'd known me since we were 18. Fresh-faced college freshmen assigned to the same dorm room by some administrative algorithm that had somehow given me a lifelong friend. She could read me better than almost anyone, but she let it drop, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Okay," she said softly, "but I'm here if you need me. Day or night, Linda. You know that, right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Sarah would become crucial to this story later, but that Thursday, she simply squeezed my hand and told me she was there if I needed her. Her hand was warm, solid, real in a way that nothing else felt right then. I would need her more than I could possibly imagine. The claustrophobia of not knowing began to suffocate me. It was like living in a house that was slowly filling with water, the level rising inch by inch, and everyone around me acting like everything was fine. I found myself checking Mark's phone when he showered, my hands shaking as I entered his passcode, the same 4 digits for years. But I scrolled through messages that revealed nothing unusual. Conversations with clients about portfolios, texts to David Chen, his business partner, about meetings and accounts, messages to me about dinner plans and grocery lists. I examined credit card statements for suspicious charges, logging into our accounts late at night when Mark was asleep. I'd go through every transaction, finding only the mundane expenses of daily life: gas, groceries, the standing lunch order at his favorite deli, the monthly charge for his gym membership. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that suggested hotels or gifts for a mistress or any of the obvious signs of infidelity. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe that receipt had an innocent explanation. Maybe that phone call was about a difficult client or a family matter Mark didn't want to burden me with. Maybe. My mind was an endless loop of rationalization and doubt. But then came the third incident, and with it, the final destruction of my denial. I was driving home from showing a property in Evanston, a beautiful Victorian that needed work but had good bones. The kind of project that would have excited me a month ago, but now felt like just another obligation. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. I glanced at it, expecting to see a reminder about a showing or a closing. Instead, it was Mark's calendar. We'd synced them years ago, back when we still believed in complete transparency. The event said, lunch, DC, at a restaurant in Bucktown. David Chen, I told myself. Lunch with his business partner. Completely normal. But something compelled me to drive toward Bucktown instead of home. I told myself I'd just drive by, maybe catch a glimpse of Mark and David. Remind myself that I was being paranoid and everything was fine. It was the middle of the afternoon, an odd time for a business lunch. Usually those were at noon or 1, not at 3:30. I spotted Mark's car parked outside a restaurant in Bucktown, the trendy neighborhood where young professionals went for artisan cocktails and small plates. It was a place we'd been to once or twice, the kind of spot that tried too hard with its exposed brick and Edison bulbs and menu that called everything artisanal. It was the middle of the afternoon, an odd time for a business lunch. I parked down the block, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I should have driven away. I should have trusted my husband. But I couldn't. Something in my gut told me to wait. 20 minutes later, Mark emerged from the restaurant. I sank down in my seat, watching through my rearview mirror. He wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, attractive and young, probably in her early 30s. She had dark hair that fell in glossy waves past her shoulders, the kind of hair that clearly required professional maintenance. She was wearing a fitted black dress and heels that suggested this wasn't a casual lunch. She was beautiful in a way that made my breath catch, in a way that made me acutely aware of every line on my 48-year-old face, every pound I'd gained since my 20s. They stood on the sidewalk talking, and I watched, my heart in my throat. She smiled up at him, saying something that made him laugh. That same laugh I'd heard on the phone. Intimate, warm, genuine in a way his laughs with me hadn't been in months. And then Mark did something that shattered the last fragment of my fragile hope. He reached out and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. It was an intimate gesture, tender and familiar. The gesture of a man who had touched this woman before, many times before. His hand lingered against her cheek for just a moment, and she leaned into it, her eyes closing briefly like someone savoring a touch they'd missed. They parted ways after that, she heading toward the L station, he returning to his car, and I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, watching my husband drive away toward his office, probably going back to work as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just been with another woman in the middle of a workday. The hum of the engine, the distant sound of traffic, the ordinary bustle of life continuing around me while my world collapsed inward. A mother walked past with a stroller. 2 teenagers laughed at something on their phone. The sun kept shining. The world kept turning. And my marriage had just ended, even if Mark didn't know it yet. I sat there for over an hour, unable to make myself start the car and drive home. Home to our brownstone with its carefully chosen furniture and framed photographs of a life that was apparently a lie. Home to the bed I shared with a man who touched another woman's face with the tenderness he used to reserve for me. That night, I made a decision. I would stop crying and start hunting. Sarah arrived at my house the next morning with 2 large coffees and a laptop. I'd called her at 11 the previous night, my voice raw from crying, and said only, "I need you. Can you come over tomorrow morning? Early." She'd asked no questions, just said, "I'll be there at 8. Now she sat on my couch, laptop balanced on her knees, looking at me with concern and something else. Determination. "Tell me everything," she said, settling into the cushions. "And I mean everything, Linda. Don't leave anything out." I did. Every suspicious moment, every gut feeling I'd ignored, every instance of Mark's strange behavior over the past months. The hotel receipt, the midnight phone call, the woman outside the restaurant. As I spoke, I watched the emotions play across Sarah's face. Anger, disgust, sympathy, and finally, a cold resolve that matched my own. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing darker as I spoke. She took notes on her laptop, creating what looked like a timeline of events. When I described seeing Mark touch the woman's face, Sarah's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jump. "Okay," she said when I finished, her voice hard. "Here's what we're going to do." Sarah worked in cybersecurity, a detail that would prove invaluable. She'd spent 20 years learning how to protect systems from intrusion, which meant she also knew exactly how to bypass those protections. She knew about tracking software, hidden apps, digital footprints that most people didn't even know they left behind. She knew how to find the truth, even when someone was trying desperately to hide it. "I need you to get me Mark's phone for about 10 minutes, she said, her fingers already flying across her keyboard, pulling up websites and apps I'd never heard of. "Can you do that?" I nodded, my chest tight with a mixture of fear and determination. He always leaves it charging in the bedroom when he showers. He takes long showers after his runs. "Perfect. Tomorrow morning, get the phone and bring it to me. I'll be parked down the block. 10 minutes. That's all I need." That evening, I went through the motions of normalcy with an acting skill I didn't know I possessed. I made dinner, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, one of Mark's favorites. We ate at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, and I smiled and nodded while he talked about his day. Some problem with the Henderson account. David Chen's new boat, the fall weather being perfect for golf. I watched his mouth move, forming words that washed over me without meaning. This man across from me, eating the dinner I'd prepared, sitting in our home, wearing the watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday. This man was a stranger, a liar, an actor playing the role of devoted husband while his heart was somewhere else. That night, lying beside him in bed, I planned. Tomorrow morning, Mark would go for his usual Saturday run. He'd come home, shower, and during those 20 minutes when he was in the bathroom, I would take his phone to Sarah. I'd finally get the truth, whatever it was. I barely slept, but when Mark's alarm went off at 7, I pretended to be deep in sleep, my breathing slow and even. I felt him slip out of bed, heard him move around the room, the soft sounds of him pulling on his running clothes. The front door closed. I waited 5 minutes, then got up and texted Sarah. "He's gone for his run. Be ready in 40 minutes. Her response came immediately. "I'm already parked down the block." The 40 minutes Mark was gone felt like hours. I paced our living room, my coffee going cold on the counter. I rehearsed what I'd do. Wait for him to get in the shower, grab the phone, run it to Sarah, get back before he finished. Simple, clean, necessary. Mark came home at 7:40, sweaty and breathless, in a good mood the way he always was after a run. "Beautiful morning," he said, kissing my cheek. I could taste salt from his sweat. "I think I'll shower and then maybe we could go to the farmer's market?" "That sounds nice," I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. "I'll make us breakfast while you shower." I waited until I heard the shower start, then slipped his phone from his nightstand and brought it to Sarah, who was waiting in her car down the block. My heart hammered the entire time, convinced Mark would somehow know, would come running out of the house wrapped in a towel, would catch me in the act. Sarah was ready, her laptop open, a cable in her hand. She took the phone and plugged it in, her fingers flying over the screen with practiced efficiency. This will track his location, clone his messages, and back up his photos to a secure cloud account only we can access, she murmured, not looking up from her work. He won't see anything different. No new apps, no signs that anything has changed, but we'll have access to everything. I watched the progress bar on her screen, each second feeling like an eternity. Done, she said, handing it back to me. This will track his location, clone his messages, and back up his photos to a secure cloud account only we can access. I hesitated, the phone heavy in my hand. It felt like I was holding a bomb. Once I went down this path, there was no going back. Is this legal? Sarah looked at me, her expression softening slightly. Is cheating on your wife legal? She countered. Listen, Linda, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. If he's innocent, you'll find out and can delete everything. If he's not. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I ran back to the house, slipping the phone back onto Mark's nightstand just as I heard the shower turn off. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I made it to the kitchen and started pulling out eggs and bread, my heart still racing by the time Mark emerged in his bathrobe, his hair wet. Smells good, he said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. I forced myself not to stiffen, not to pull away. I even managed to lean back into him, to turn my head for the kiss he pressed to my temple. We went to the farmer's market that afternoon, his hand in mine. And I smiled and chatted with the vendors and bought tomatoes I had no intention of cooking. I was playing a role now, just like him. The difference was, I knew I was acting. He still thought he was fooling me. The obstacles were numerous. I wasn't technically inclined, struggling to understand the various apps and monitoring systems Sarah had installed. She had to walk me through accessing the cloud storage, showing me how to check locations without leaving a trace of my own digital footprint. Every time Mark came near me while I was checking the tracking data, I'd have to quickly switch screens, my heart racing with the fear of being discovered. The guilt was constant too, a nagging voice in my head asking if I was the villain in this story, if I was violating Mark's privacy and destroying trust. But that voice grew quieter with each suspicious location ping, each unexplained absence. The data didn't lie. Neither did the pattern that was beginning to emerge. The major discovery came 2 weeks into our surveillance operation. I was checking the photo backup on a Saturday morning while Mark was at the gym, or so he claimed. The tracking showed he was indeed at our usual gym in Lincoln Park, which should have been reassuring. He was where he said he'd be, doing what he said he was doing. It wasn't, because buried in the backed-up photos was a folder I'd never seen before, hidden within hidden directories, files with innocuous names. Client Files 2023. Tax documents. But when I opened them, they weren't documents at all. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first photo showed Mark and the dark-haired woman from the restaurant, sitting close together on what appeared to be a couch in an unfamiliar apartment. The decor was modern, minimalist, not Mark's taste at all. They were laughing, his arm around her shoulders, her hand resting on his thigh. The intimacy between them was undeniable. I scrolled through more images, each one a knife to my heart. Mark kissing her cheek at what looked like a rooftop bar, the Chicago skyline glittering behind them, the two of them at what looked like a weekend getaway, standing before a lake I didn't recognize, probably somewhere in Wisconsin or Michigan, both of them in hiking gear, his arm around her waist, her head leaning against his shoulder. A selfie of them in bed, her head on his bare chest, both of them smiling with the contentment of lovers who've just woken up together, that particular glow of intimacy that can't be faked. There were dozens of photos, months of memories I knew nothing about, a parallel life documented in digital images. But it was the last photo that truly destroyed me. Mark holding a pregnancy test, the kind that displays the word pregnant in that horrible digital font. The woman's face wasn't in the shot, just her hand holding the test, her fingers delicate and ringless, and Mark's expression of absolute joy. Pure, unfiltered happiness. The kind of joy I'd dreamed of seeing on his face when we'd tried for children, when month after month I'd taken tests that came back negative, when he'd told me it was okay, that we didn't need children to be complete. He'd lied. He did want children, just not with me. I closed the laptop and ran to the bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left inside me. I knelt on the cold tile floor, my forehead resting against the toilet seat, and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest, from the place where I'd kept my hope and my love and my stupid, naive belief that my marriage was real. The woman's name, according to the message threads Sarah had recovered, was Jessica Price. She was 32, a marketing manager at a firm downtown, 3 blocks from Mark's office. They'd been seeing each other for 18 months. 18 months of lies, of secret meetings, of Mark living a parallel life while I decorated our home and planned our anniversary party and believed in us. 18 months. While I was showing houses to young couples and advising them on the biggest investment of their lives, Mark was building a separate existence. While I was hosting dinner parties and accepting compliments on our perfect marriage, he was taking another woman to rooftop bars and weekend getaways. While I was sleeping soundly beside him, trusting completely, he was counting down the hours until he could see her again. The message threads were worse than the photos. I read them all, torturing myself with every, "I love you," and "I miss you," and "I can't wait to start our life together." I read about the baby they were planning, about the apartment they were looking at in Wicker Park, about Mark's plan to wait until after our anniversary to ask for a divorce. "I need to do it right," he'd texted Jessica. "Linda deserves that much. But after the party, I'll tell her, and then we can finally be together." He'd been planning to leave me, and the anniversary party, the celebration of our 23 years together, was supposed to be his final performance before he walked away. The sadness that followed lasted exactly 48 hours. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent 2 days in bed, crying until my eyes were so swollen I could barely see. I looked at our wedding photos, our vacation snapshots, every documented moment of our life together, and tried to figure out when it had all become a lie. Had he ever loved me? Or had I just been convenient, a placeholder until something better came along? Then the sadness calcified into something else entirely. Cold, focused rage. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over, forming a hard, protective shell around your heart. I stopped being a victim and became a strategist. If Mark wanted to destroy our marriage, I would ensure he lost everything in the process. The first call I made was to Thomas Chen, a divorce attorney Sarah recommended. No relation to David Chen, she'd assured me, and with a reputation for being ruthless in court. I met with him in his office downtown, a space all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of place designed to convey power and authority. Thomas was in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I told him everything, showed him the photos, the messages, the evidence Sarah and I had compiled. He listened without interrupting, making notes on a legal pad. "You have a strong case," he said when I finished. "Especially with this level of documentation. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but judges still take infidelity into account when dividing assets, particularly if you can prove financial dishonesty." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, we need to look at whether Mark has been hiding money, moving assets, preparing financially for a divorce. If he has, that works in your favor." The second call I made was to a private investigator Thomas recommended, someone who could provide court-admissible evidence of the affair. Photos that would hold up legally, not just screenshots from a phone. The PI, a woman named Rachel who looked more like a yoga instructor than a detective, assured me she could get what we needed. "How long has the affair been going on?" she asked during our first meeting. 18 months that I know of." She nodded, unsurprised. "Long-term affair. Those are actually easier to document. They get comfortable, careless. I'll have what you need within a week." The third call was to my financial advisor, moving assets into accounts only I could access. I couldn't empty our joint accounts without tipping Mark off, but I could protect myself. I opened a new savings account at a different bank, began funneling money from my real estate commissions into it. I gathered information on all our investments, our retirement accounts, the house deed, everything that would matter in a divorce. I learned things about myself during those weeks of preparation. I learned I could smile through dinner while planning my husband's downfall. I learned I could make love to a man I despised, closing my eyes and thinking of the moment when I'd watch his world collapse, all while gathering more evidence against him. I learned that grief and rage could coexist, that you could mourn someone who was still alive, that you could hate someone and still remember loving them. The near disaster came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was home early from work, printing out bank statements and transaction records in Mark's study. Sarah had helped me break into his computer, another skill from her cybersecurity background. I'd found files labeled personal and financial planning that told me everything I needed to know. Mark had been preparing for a divorce for months. He'd consulted with lawyers, gotten estimates on asset division, opened separate accounts. He'd been planning this while kissing me goodnight, while holding my hand at the farmer's market, while playing the role of devoted husband. I was printing everything when I didn't hear his car pull into the driveway, didn't hear the front door open. The printer was loud, churning out page after page of evidence. "Linda?" his voice called from downstairs. "Are you home?" My heart stopped. I frantically gathered the papers, shoving them into a folder and hiding them behind a row of books on the shelf. The printer was still going, sheets piling up in the tray. I hit cancel, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Pulled the last pages from the tray and shoved them with the others. "In here," I called back, my voice remarkably steady. "Just looking for a file." Mark appeared in the doorway, his expression curious. He never came home this early. It was only 3 in the afternoon. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said, standing and moving toward him with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Just needed some old tax documents for a client who's buying a house. You know how complicated it gets when they're self-employed." The lie came easily now, smooth and practiced. I'd become someone who could lie to her husband's face without flinching, without a telltale flush or nervous gesture. I'd become a woman I didn't entirely recognize, harder and colder than I'd ever been. He accepted it without question, just as he probably expected me to accept his lies. "I came home early because I was thinking we could have dinner together. I feel like I've been working too much lately. Let me take you somewhere nice." Guilt, I realized. He was feeling guilty and trying to assuage it with dinner. Or maybe Jessica had canceled plans. And he found himself with an evening to fill and a wife who expected attention. "That sounds lovely," I said, and kissed his cheek. But I was done accepting anything. The psychological toll of the masquerade was heavier than I'd anticipated. I had to act normally at the dinner party our friends hosted, had to smile and nod when people complimented our marriage. When Sarah's neighbor Nancy said we should write a book about making love last. When Mark's business partner David raised a toast to the couple we all aspire to be. I had to lie next to Mark every night, feeling his warmth, remembering when that warmth meant safety instead of betrayal. Some nights he'd reach for me, and I'd let him, closing my eyes and pretending I was someone else, somewhere else. Anyone but Linda Morrison, lying beneath the man who was destroying her life. Sarah became my lifeline during this period, the only person who knew the truth. We'd meet for coffee, choosing places far from our usual haunts where no one would recognize us. She'd listen to me vent, talk me down from the ledge when I wanted to confront Mark immediately, remind me that patience would pay off. "You're stronger than you think," she told me during one of our coded coffee meetings at a cafe on the far south side, a place we'd never been before and would never go again. Most people would have confronted him by now, screaming and throwing things. But you're playing the long game, and when this is over, you'll have everything you need to start over. He'll have nothing. The long game involved meticulous planning. I consulted with my lawyer about the best way to protect my assets and ensure I'd come out of the divorce financially secure. Thomas walked me through scenarios, helped me understand what I could reasonably expect. "The house is marital property," he explained. "But given his infidelity and the fact that you can prove he was planning to leave you, we can argue that you should retain it. The retirement accounts will be split, but we can negotiate for a favorable division. If he resists, we make it public. We go to court and let everyone see who he really is." I gathered allies among our mutual friends, carefully dropping hints about Mark's frequent absences and suspicious behavior without revealing the full truth yet. I wanted witnesses, people who would remember later that I'd seemed concerned, that I'd tried to make sense of his behavior. "Mark seems really stressed lately," I'd say to Nancy over wine. "I worry about him." "Has he been working a lot?" she'd ask, and I'd nod sadly. "So much. Sometimes he doesn't come home until late. Sometimes I wake up and he's on the phone at 2 a.m, dealing with some client crisis." I was building a narrative, planting seeds. When the truth came out, no one would be completely surprised. They'd remember my concern. They'd see me as the worried wife who'd tried to understand, not the suspicious shrew demanding explanations. The tension was constant, a taut wire stretched between pretending and revealing. Every interaction with Mark was a performance, every smile calculated. I felt like I was splitting into two people, the naive wife he still saw and the avenging fury he had no idea existed. And through it all, I planned the trap that would bring everything into the light. Our 23rd anniversary was approaching. Mark suggested a party, a celebration with our closest friends and family. "Let's remind everyone why we're the couple they all admire," he said with that charming smile that used to make my knees weak. Now it just made me sick. Now I understand what he really meant. "Let's have one final performance before I destroy your life." "That sounds perfect," I agreed, already seeing the pieces falling into place. "We should really do it right. Caterers, music, the whole thing. Let's celebrate all we've built together." Mark seemed pleased, even relieved. Maybe he thought the party would make his guilt easier to manage. Maybe he thought one last celebration would somehow make his betrayal less cruel. Or maybe he was just that much of a narcissist, needing the admiration and attention even as he planned to walk away from it all. The party would be the stage. The guests would be my witnesses. And Mark's carefully constructed lies would burn to the ground in front of everyone he cared about. I threw myself into planning with an enthusiasm that wasn't entirely feigned. I wanted this party to be perfect, wanted every detail to reflect the life Mark was about to lose. I booked caterers, the expensive ones Mark had always said were too pricey. I hired a string quartet, knowing Mark loved classical music. I selected wines that Mark loved, imported from the Italian vineyard we'd visited on our 15th anniversary. I sent invitations to everyone we knew, making sure that his business partners and his parents would be in attendance. Mark's mother, who adored me, who called me the daughter she'd never had. His father, who'd given Mark advice about marriage and loyalty at our wedding. They needed to see who their son really was. I invited Jessica's boss. I'd found the CEO's name on LinkedIn. Sent him a personal invitation mentioning that Mark worked with many people from Jessica's firm and we'd love to have them celebrate with us. He'd accepted, probably thinking it was a networking opportunity. Sarah helped me with the technical aspects. We'd need a projector and a screen, supposedly for a slideshow of our years together. We tested the equipment in my living room one afternoon while Mark was at work, making sure the image was crystal clear, the screen positioned where everyone would have to see it. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as we set up the equipment, testing angles and connections. Public humiliation is nuclear. You can't take it back once it's done. The gossip alone will follow him for years. I thought about that photograph I'd seen, Mark holding the pregnancy test with joy on his face. Joy he'd never shown when we'd tried for children years ago, when test after test came back negative, and he'd told me it didn't matter, that we were enough as we were. I thought about 18 months of lies, of him touching another woman while coming home to my bed, of him planning a future that didn't include me while I planned anniversary parties. "I'm sure," I said. The night before the party, I barely slept. My emotions were a chaotic mix of calm determination and nervous anticipation. I went over my speech in my head, refined it, perfected it. Every word had to land like a blow. Every revelation had to cut deep. I wanted Mark to feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. I thought about backing out, about calling the whole thing off, confronting Mark privately, handling this like a civilized adult. But then I'd remember his plan to divorce me after the party, to use our anniversary as a stage for his final performance. He'd already chosen public theater. I was just rewriting the script. The morning of the party, Mark kissed me and told me he loved me. I looked into his eyes and saw a stranger, someone I'd shared a life with but never truly known. "I love you too," I said, and for the first time the lie didn't hurt. It felt like closing a door. Guests began arriving at 7. Our home filled with laughter and conversation, the air thick with the scent of catered hors d'oeuvres and expensive wine. The string quartet played in the corner of our living room, filling the space with music. People complimented the decorations, the food, the ambiance. "This is beautiful, Linda," Mark's mother said, kissing my cheek. "You always throw the most wonderful parties." Mark played the perfect host, charming and attentive, his hand occasionally finding the small of my back in that proprietary way that used to make me feel cherished. Now it just felt like ownership. He laughed with his business partners, hugged his parents, told stories about our early years together that made people smile and clink their glasses. I watched him work the room and marveled at how good he was at this. The performance, the pretense. He should have been an actor. He'd certainly fooled me for long enough. At 8:30, I clinked my glass to get everyone's attention. The room quieted, faces turning toward me with expectant smiles. This was usually when Mark would give a toast, when he'd speak about our love and our future. Not tonight. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. 23 years is a long time to be with someone. Long enough that you think you know them completely. Long enough to build a life, make plans, trust without question. I paused, watching Mark's smile falter slightly. He sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite identify the threat. His hand tightened on his wine glass. "I thought I'd put together a little slideshow," I continued. "A journey through our marriage. Sarah, could you start the projection?" The first image that appeared on the screen was indeed from our wedding. Young and hopeful, Mark and I smiled at each other with the confidence of people who believed love conquered all. I was 25. He was 27. Both of us so sure we'd beat the odds. The next few photos followed the expected pattern. Vacations, holidays, anniversary dinners, our trip to Paris, Christmas morning with Mark's family, the dinner party where we'd announced we'd bought the brownstone. I heard warm murmurs from the crowd, saw Mark relax slightly. This was what he'd expected, a celebration of our years together. One last hurrah before he walked away. Then the images changed. Mark and Jessica at a restaurant, intimate and close. The date stamp in the corner showed it was from 6 months ago, a Thursday evening when Mark had told me he was working late. Mark and Jessica on what appeared to be a weekend getaway, his arm around her waist. The lake behind them was clearly Lake Geneva, where Mark had told me he was going to a financial planning conference last spring. Mark and Jessica in bed together, a moment of post-coital intimacy captured in digital clarity. Her head on his bare chest, his hand in her hair, both of them glowing. The room erupted. Gasps, shocked exclamations, the sound of someone dropping a glass that shattered on our hardwood floor. Nancy's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's mother went pale. His business partners looked at each other, then at Mark, their expressions transforming from confusion to disgust. I kept my eyes on Mark, watched his face cycle through shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. The blood drained from his face. He looked like he might be sick. "Linda, stop this," he said, his voice strangled. But I was done taking orders from him. The slideshow continued. More photos, dates, locations, proof of an 18-month affair conducted while I believed in our marriage. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Finally, the last image appeared. Mark holding the pregnancy test, joy written all over his face. Mark's mother made a sound like a wounded animal. His father stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "How could you?" someone shouted. I think it was Sarah. Mark started toward me, his hand outstretched as if he could somehow stop what was already done, as if he could rewind time and prevent this moment. "Linda, wait, I can explain," he began. "Explain?" My voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room fell silent, everyone watching us. "Explain the 18 months of lies? Explain Jessica Price, the woman you've been building a second life with? Explain why you're having a child with her while I believed you when you said you didn't want children?" Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice never wavered. I'd practiced this. I'd earned this moment. "I stood by you for 23 years, Mark. Through your career changes, through financial stress, through your father's illness and your mother's surgery. I supported every dream you had. I made this house a home. I built a life around loving you, and you threw it all away." The most savage moment came with my final words, words I'd rehearsed until they were perfect. "I gave you 23 years of my life, Mark, my loyalty, my trust, my love. And you threw it all away for someone younger, for the excitement of sneaking around, for the thrill of thinking you could get away with it." I took a breath, looking around the room at the faces of everyone who'd ever called us relationship goals. "Well, congratulations, you got caught, and now you have nothing. Not me, not this house, not your reputation, not the respect of anyone in this room. You have nothing." The power I felt in that moment was intoxicating. Every eye in the room was on us, witnesses to Mark's destruction. His mother was crying. His father looked like he wanted to hit him. David Chen was backing toward the door, probably realizing his own involvement in covering up the affair was about to be exposed. This wasn't just a divorce. It was justice, public and absolute. The aftermath of that night became the stuff of Chicago society legend. Mark's parents left without speaking to him, their disappointment written in every line of their faces. His mother stopped at the door, looked back at her son, and said simply, "I raised you better than this." Then she took my hand, squeezed it, and left. That gesture meant more to me than almost anything else that night. His business partner, David Chen, who'd apparently known about the affair and said nothing, found himself socially frozen out by everyone who'd attended that party. Within weeks, clients were pulling their accounts, citing ethical concerns. His wife filed for divorce, apparently discovering that David had his own secrets he'd been hiding. Friends who'd once called us the perfect couple now couldn't meet Mark's eyes. The story spread through our social circle like wildfire, then jumped to Mark's professional network. Turns out people who trust you with their retirement accounts care about your character. They care about whether you're someone who keeps promises or breaks them. The attempted manipulation began immediately. Mark showed up at the house the next day, desperate and disheveled in a way I'd never seen him. His hair was uncombed, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd clearly been crying, probably for himself, for the life he'd lost. "Linda, please," he begged through the locked door. I'd changed the locks that morning, first thing. Sarah had found a locksmith who could come on a Sunday for extra money. "We can work through this. I'll end it with Jessica. I'll do anything. Please, just let me in. Let me explain." I opened the door just enough to look at him. "You'll do anything?" I repeated. "Then sign the divorce papers my lawyer sent you. Give me the house, half of everything we've built, and walk away quietly. That's the only thing you can do for me now." He threatened me then, his desperation turning to anger. The mask slipped completely, and I saw the man he really was beneath the charm. "You can't take everything," he snarled. "I'll fight you in court. I'll drag this out until you have nothing left. I'll make sure everyone knows how crazy you are, spying on me, violating my privacy. You'll look like a psycho stalker by the time I'm done." I smiled, a cold expression that felt foreign on my face. "Try it, Mark. See what happens when every detail of your affair becomes public record. See how many clients want to trust their money to a man who can't even be faithful to his wife. See how Jessica feels when she realizes you're going to lose everything and she's tied herself to a sinking ship." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "And Mark? About that pregnancy. Did you know Illinois law requires you to pay child support based on your income? Your current income. Not what it will be after you lose half your clients and your reputation. You're going to be broke, disgraced, and tied to a woman who chose to have a baby with a married man. Good luck with that." His face crumpled. The anger drained away, leaving only defeat. He'd thought he could intimidate me, could bully me into accepting less than I deserved. He'd forgotten that I'd been negotiating real estate deals for 20 years. I knew how to call a bluff. The enabler, David Chen, tried to defend Mark at a mutual friends gathering the following week. I heard about it from 3 different people, each calling to make sure I knew what David had said. "People make mistakes," he'd apparently told the group gathered at the country club. "Mark's going through a hard time. Marriage is complicated. Who are we to judge?" Sarah shut him down immediately. She'd been there, had confronted him in front of everyone. "Mark's going through the consequences of his own choices," she'd said, her voice cold. "There's a difference between a mistake and an 18-month affair complete with pregnancy. He didn't slip and fall into another woman's bed. He made thousands of choices to betray Linda. Don't you dare minimize that." Within a month, David found himself looking for new business partners as his association with Mark became toxic. The community had spoken and they'd chosen sides. My side. The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. My lawyer had done his job well, presenting evidence of Mark's affair and his attempts to hide assets in preparation for what he'd clearly planned as an eventual divorce on his terms. Thomas Chen stood before the judge and methodically destroyed every argument Mark's lawyer tried to make. "Your Honor, the evidence shows that Mr. Morrison engaged in a long-term affair while actively deceiving his wife about his intentions. He opened separate bank accounts, consulted with divorce attorneys, and made financial preparations for ending the marriage, all while Mrs. Morrison believed they were working toward their future together. This isn't just infidelity. It's calculated deception with financial implications." The judge was unimpressed with Mark's protests and arguments. She was a woman in her 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had clearly seen every variation of marital betrayal. When Mark's lawyer tried to argue that I'd violated Mark's privacy by accessing his phone, she shut it down immediately. "Mr. Morrison, you don't get to commit adultery and then claim privacy protections. Your wife had reason to suspect infidelity, and her methods of confirming those suspicions, while perhaps ethically questionable, do not invalidate the evidence itself. The court finds the evidence credible and admissible." The house became mine. Half of Mark's retirement accounts became mine. The cars, the investments, the life we'd built, all divided with the cold precision of legal documentation. I got more than half, actually, thanks to Mark's attempts to hide money and his lawyer's failed strategy of attacking me instead of negotiating in good faith. Mark moved into a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. His income stretched thin between his own expenses and the child support he'd soon be paying for his child with Jessica. I heard through mutual friends that the apartment was in a building with thin walls and a broken elevator, a far cry from our brownstone in Lincoln Park. I heard through mutual friends that Jessica had started to see the real Mark, the one who appeared charming until the pressure was on. She was discovering what I'd known for months: that a man who would betray one woman would betray another without hesitation. Apparently, Mark had promised Jessica he'd be able to support her and the baby comfortably. He'd painted pictures of a beautiful life together, maybe a house in Evanston, private schools for their child, the kind of upper-middle-class existence we'd had. But that required money Mark no longer had. His client list had shrunk by 60%, his reputation was destroyed, and Jessica was 7 months pregnant, realizing she'd blown up her own life for a man who couldn't deliver on his promises. I felt a savage satisfaction hearing this, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. They'd built their relationship on lies and betrayal. They deserved to see it crumble. The righteous satisfaction I felt wasn't petty. It was earned. I'd played the game better than Mark had, planned more carefully, struck more decisively. The power dynamic had reversed completely. Where once I'd been the naive wife, trusting and devoted, I was now the victor, standing over the ruins of his carefully constructed double life. When Mark showed up one final time, thin and haggard, begging me to understand that he'd made a mistake, that he still loved me, I felt nothing. It was 3 months after the party, late November, the first real cold snap of the season. He stood on the porch where we'd sat together on summer evenings, where we'd carved pumpkins the previous Halloween, where he'd kissed me on our first date night after moving into the house. "Linda, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. I made a terrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life. But doesn't 23 years count for something? Can't we talk about this? Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just an empty space where he used to live in my heart." "Goodbye, Mark," I said, closing the door on him and that entire chapter of my life. 6 months after the anniversary party that destroyed my marriage, I found myself in a new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The view was spectacular, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over water that changed colors with the weather. All glass and light, nothing like the brownstone in Lincoln Park that had held so many memories. I'd sold that house, unable to live with the ghosts of what I'd believed was real. Even though I'd won it in the divorce, even though keeping it would have been another victory over Mark, I couldn't stay there. Every room held memories that had turned poisonous. The kitchen where we'd cooked together, the bedroom where we'd made love, the living room where I'd destroyed his lies in front of everyone we knew. I sold it for significantly more than we'd paid for it, pocketed the profit, and bought this place. A 2-bedroom condo on the 32nd floor, modern and clean, with no history except the future I was building. This new space was mine alone, decorated to my taste, filled with art I'd chosen and furniture that bore no connection to Mark. I'd bought a velvet couch in deep emerald green, something Mark would have hated. I'd hung abstract art, bold colors and shapes that meant nothing to anyone but me. I'd created a space that was entirely my own. The legal and financial battle had settled in my favor completely. My lawyer had been worth every dollar I'd paid him, ensuring that I emerged from the divorce financially secure and legally protected. Mark's attempts to negotiate better terms had failed at every turn, his credibility destroyed by the mountain of evidence against him. I focused on rebuilding. My real estate career, which I'd neglected during the months of investigation and confrontation, demanded my attention. I'd lost some clients during the divorce, people who felt uncomfortable with the drama, but I'd gained more, many more. Colleagues who'd heard about the scandal treated me with a mixture of sympathy and respect. I became the woman who'd fought back, who'd refused to be a victim. I became someone other women saw as strong, as an inspiration. Sales increased as clients sought me out, drawn by my reputation for honesty and strength. "I want someone who tells the truth," one client told me during our first meeting. "Someone who doesn't play games. You're that person." My business grew by 40% that first year after the divorce. I became one of Coldwell Banker's top producers in the Chicago area. The company featured me in their marketing materials, held me up as an example of resilience and success. Sarah remained my closest friend, the anchor who'd kept me grounded through the worst of it. We met for lunch on a Saturday afternoon at our favorite cafe in Wicker Park, the same place where I'd been unable to tell her the truth all those months ago. It felt full circle, sitting at the same table by the window, but this time with nothing to hide. "You look different," she observed, studying my face with that analytical gaze I'd come to appreciate. "Lighter, like you've shed something heavy." "I have," I agreed, taking a sip of my latte. "I've shed the weight of living a lie, the weight of being someone's fool." "You were never a fool," Sarah said firmly. "You were loyal. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes him a liar." I smiled, grateful for her friendship in a way I'd never adequately expressed. "Thank you. For everything. I literally couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," she countered. "It would have taken longer, and you might have made some mistakes along the way. But you would have figured it out. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Linda. You always have been." The wisdom I'd gained from this experience was hard-won but invaluable. I thought about all the signs I'd ignored, all the times my intuition had screamed warnings that I'd dismissed as paranoia or insecurity. Never again. If I could go back and tell that Linda, the one who found the hotel receipt and convinced herself there was an innocent explanation, I'd shake her by the shoulders and tell her to trust her gut. Your intuition isn't paranoia. It's your subconscious mind processing details your conscious mind doesn't want to acknowledge. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't gaslight yourself because confronting the truth is terrifying. The fear of knowing is nothing compared to the damage of willful ignorance. I'd wasted months convincing myself I was being paranoid, months during which Mark had continued his affair, had gotten Jessica pregnant, had planned his exit strategy. If I'd trusted my instincts immediately, I could have spared myself some of that pain. But I'd been taught, like so many women, that female intuition is hysteria, that suspicion is unattractive, that a good wife gives her husband the benefit of the doubt. Screw that. A good wife deserves a faithful husband. When she doesn't have one, she has every right to find out. I'd also learned that betrayal has patterns. The gaslighting Mark employed, making me question my own perceptions and sanity, is a classic manipulation tactic. The way he dismissed my concerns, laughed off my questions, turned my legitimate worries into evidence of my instability. These weren't unique to my situation. They're hallmarks of someone who's hiding something significant and needs you to doubt yourself more than you trust your instincts. If your partner makes you feel crazy for asking reasonable questions, that's a red flag the size of Texas. Financial abuse is another pattern I recognized in hindsight. Mark had slowly taken control of our major financial decisions, encouraging me to trust him with investments and long-term planning. "You focus on your career," he'd say. "I'll handle the money side of things. That's what I do for a living, right?" It had seemed reasonable at the time. Why wouldn't I trust a financial consultant with our finances? But it had left me vulnerable, unaware of the full extent of our assets, unprepared for the financial complications of divorce. When I discovered he'd been moving money into accounts I didn't know existed, preparing for a divorce he'd planned on his terms, I realized how vulnerable I'd been. Always maintain financial independence. Always know where your money is and have resources in your own name. Love shouldn't require financial blindness. The narcissistic traits Mark displayed, the ability to maintain a double life without apparent guilt, the charm he used to manipulate both me and Jessica, these are warning signs of someone who views people as tools rather than partners. He'd compartmentalized his life so effectively that he could kiss me goodnight and text Jessica minutes later without any visible remorse. A truly healthy relationship doesn't require one person to sacrifice their intuition, their financial security, or their sense of reality. If you find yourself constantly making excuses for your partner's behavior, constantly explaining away red flags, constantly defending them to yourself, step back and ask why. Why does this person require so much benefit of the doubt? Why are you working so hard to make their actions make sense? A good partner doesn't require you to twist yourself into knots to trust them. Their actions align with their words. Their life is transparent because they have nothing to hide. The educational segment of my story needs to be clear, because I know some of you listening are seeing parallels in your own relationships. You're making excuses right now, telling yourself it's different, that your situation isn't as bad as mine, that you're probably just being paranoid. Stop. Listen to yourself. If you're worried enough to be comparing your relationship to mine, something is wrong. Trust that feeling. If you're listening to this and seeing parallels in your own relationship, pay attention. Gaslighting makes you question your memory, your perceptions, your sanity. If your partner frequently tells you you're overreacting, being paranoid, or remembering things wrong, that's a red flag. Does your partner dismiss your concerns by calling you crazy, jealous, or insecure? Do they turn your questions back on you, making you defend your right to ask? Do they have explanations for everything that sound reasonable in the moment, but leave you feeling uneasy later? Those are warning signs. Financial secrecy, whether it's unexplained charges, hidden accounts, or resistance to transparency about money, is a form of control and abuse. You have a right to know where your shared money goes and to have independent resources. In a healthy relationship, both partners should have full visibility into finances. If your spouse resists this, if they tell you that you're too controlling or that you should trust them, ask yourself why. What are they hiding? Why does transparency threaten them? Emotional detachment that comes on gradually can signal that your partner has invested their emotional energy elsewhere. If the person who used to be attentive and affectionate becomes distant and dismissive, investigate why. Pay attention to the small changes, the way they angle their phone away from you, the new passcode they suddenly need, the working late that becomes routine, the business trips that multiply. These aren't always signs of cheating, but they're worth investigating. Trust your intuition, but verify with evidence. I'm not advocating for constant suspicion in relationships, but if something triggers your concern, you have the right to seek clarity. A partner who has nothing to hide won't make you feel crazy for asking questions. They'll provide answers and reassurance. Mark made me feel insane for having completely reasonable concerns. That alone should have told me everything I needed to know. Document everything. In my case, having concrete evidence protected me legally and financially. If you suspect something is wrong, keep records, save messages, document incidents. It's not paranoia if you're right, and if you're wrong, you can delete everything and move on with peace of mind. Take screenshots, save emails, keep a journal of suspicious incidents with dates and details. If it comes to divorce, evidence is everything. Without it, it's your word against theirs. With it, you have power. Finally, build a support network before you need it. Sarah was crucial to my ability to investigate and ultimately confront Mark. If I'd been isolated, without friends who could offer both emotional support and practical help, the outcome might have been very different. Maintain your friendships, your independence, your own identity outside of your relationship. These connections aren't a backup plan. They're essential to your well-being regardless of whether your marriage succeeds or fails. Don't let your relationship become your entire world. Mark had slowly isolated me without me even realizing it. Our social life revolved around his work friends. Our schedule accommodated his career. I'd lost touch with some of my college friends, let some of my own friendships slip because Mark and I were so focused on each other. When everything fell apart, I realized how vulnerable I'd become. Thank God for Sarah, who'd refused to let me disappear into my marriage, who'd insisted on our weekly lunches even when I was too busy, who'd maintained our friendship even when I wasn't putting in equal effort. As I sit here now, looking out over the lake from my new apartment, I feel a sense of peace I didn't think possible 6 months ago. The view is breathtaking today, the water a deep blue under clear skies, sailboats dotting the horizon. The city sprawls to my left, full of possibility and second chances. The grief has cycled through its stages, from denial to anger to bargaining to depression, finally landing on acceptance. I don't miss Mark. I miss what I thought we had, but that was an illusion, a story I told myself based on lies. The real Mark was a stranger who happened to share my last name and my bed while building a separate life I knew nothing about. The real Mark was someone who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching, who could make love to me while planning his exit, who could destroy 23 years without apparent remorse. I don't miss that person. I don't want him back. I'm grateful he's gone. The question I'm left with, and the one I want to pose to you, is this. How well do you really know the people you trust? Not how well you think you know them, but how well you actually know them. Do you know their passwords, their schedules, their true financial situation? Do you trust them because they've earned it through consistent transparency and honesty, or because you're afraid of what you might find if you question them? I'm not suggesting everyone should spy on their partners or live in a state of constant suspicion, but I am saying that trust without verification is just hope in disguise. Real trust can withstand questions and transparency. It doesn't require you to ignore your instincts or blind yourself to warning signs. Mark demanded blind trust. He wanted me to accept his explanations without question, to ignore my instincts, to believe him simply because he expected me to. That's not trust. That's control. Sometimes the worst betrayal, the kind that shatters your world and forces you to rebuild from nothing, opens the door to the best opportunities. I'm living in an apartment I love, with a view that takes my breath away every morning. I'm thriving in my career, making more money than I ever have. I've rekindled friendships I'd neglected during my marriage. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. I've started dating again, cautiously. I'm not ready for anything serious, might not be for a long time. But I've been on a few dates, remembered what it feels like to be pursued by someone who's genuinely interested, who asks questions and listens to my answers, who doesn't make me feel crazy for having opinions and boundaries. None of this would have happened if Mark hadn't forced my hand with his betrayal. So yes, he destroyed our marriage. But in doing so, he freed me to become someone stronger, wiser, more resilient. The Linda who found that hotel receipt would barely recognize the woman I am now, and I consider that a victory. Before I go, I want to hear from you. What city are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this, or known someone who has? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted Mark immediately, or would you have played the long game like I did? Do you think I was right to expose him publicly, or should I have handled it privately? I know some people will think I went too far, that the public humiliation was cruel. To them I say, 18 months of lies is crueler. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories, your support, your insights mean more to me than you know. If you agree that trusting your intuition is crucial, hit that like button. Let's build a community of people who refuse to ignore red flags, who trust themselves, who know they deserve partners who are honest and faithful. And if you found value in this story, whether as entertainment or as a cautionary tale, please subscribe. There are more stories coming, more journeys through betrayal and triumph. More lessons learned the hard way, so perhaps you won't have to learn them yourself. I also encourage you to check out the other videos on this channel. You might find stories that resonate even more deeply, or situations that mirror your own experiences. We all carry our scars, our survival stories, our moments of choosing to fight back rather than accept defeat. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect it, but don't close it off completely. There's a difference between wisdom and cynicism, between healthy boundaries and walls that keep out all possibility of connection. Mark taught me that not everyone deserves my trust, but that doesn't mean no one does. There are good people out there, honest people, people who honor their commitments and love with integrity. They exist, and they deserve partners who can still be open despite past wounds. Trust, like respect, should be earned and maintained through consistent action. Demand nothing less. You deserve nothing less. Take care, and remember, sometimes the fire that burns down your life is the same fire that lights your way forward. Embrace the flames,